Like me to start recording now, or oh, there you go. Okay.
There we go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Apprenticeship. Great to see you. I'm Luther Jackson, a workforce consultant, and very pleased to have our friend Mike Roberts with us today. Over the last few years, of course, we've heard a lot of talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but unfortunately, the number of impactful and scalable initiatives really remain few and far between. But meanwhile, in the San Diego area, Mike and his nonprofit Creating Coding Careers is growing a DEI model that is delivering results in the marketplace. 79% of the apprentices are from groups underrepresented in tech, and 95% of graduates are landing jobs as software and data engineers. And with an average wage, Mike, of over $80,000, I think, right?
It's north of 80 at this point. It's started to kind of really check back up again. So it's good.
That's great. So we're delighted to have Mike here to describe his model, to share a particularly inspiring origin story for him in tech, and to take your questions. So why don't we start with intros, and then we'll all go over some ground rules, and we'll have a short presentation, an opportunity for questions. And then Anita will close this out and has and wants to discuss an exciting innovation for apprenticeship. So we're looking forward to that. So let's start with intros. Anita, why don't you go first?
Sure. Hi, I'm Anita. I'm sorry. What should I say?
Just name, organization, and position.
My name's Anita. I'm with Bayback Media. We're a 47-year-old arts nonprofit. I've been with Apprenticeship for a while now, and at Bayback, I am a workforce and operations manager.
Thank you. Nitron?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Nee. I'm with Calright College as an employment and development coordinator.
Thank you. Mindy?
I'm Mindy Aronoff. I work at Bayback Media, Bay Area Video Coalition. I'm currently the interim training and workforce specialist.
Thank you. Temple?
No title, but I know a lot about apprenticeships, and I'm here to keep people honest. That's all.
We always appreciate that. Thank you, Temple. Rick?
I'm Rick Raffia. I am a consultant. I'm actually working with Mike right now, so I was really excited that we could have him talking right as I just got started working with him directly. And I basically am helping people with form any kind of career pathway into computing, especially for underrepresented populations. So you can see why I want to work with Mike.
Thank you, Rick. Peter?
Peter Simon. I'm one of the two partners in High Road Alliance. We do work around equitable career pathways. We do a lot of work with union apprenticeships mostly. And last year put out a thing which I could send you called the Equitable Apprenticeship Toolkit that people have been using around the country. And I got to work with some of these people last year around helping to think about careers and apprenticeships in tech. So I'm really curious what you have to say today. It's nice to meet you.
Thanks, Peter. Orion?
Yeah, Orion Willis, TechSF manager, founding member of ApprenticeSIP, one of the pupils under Peter's coaching for an accelerator grant not long ago. And yeah, I owe you, Rick and Mike, an email. I'm still waiting to hear back from my comms team, but super excited to hear more about Mike's program down south.
Okay, Mike, before you kick it off, just want to say our I guess, chief ground rule. If you have questions or comments, use the raised hand function, and I'll be happy to recognize you. Without further ado, Mike, take it away.
Thanks, Luther. Thanks, everybody, for having me. So my background is that I am a software engineer by trade. I've been writing software most of my life. As far back as I can remember, we had one of the first home computers, that's what PCs were called at the time, home computers. And I was just enthralled with the fact that you could turn it on and you could get it to do some, pretty cool stuff as a kid. And I can remember the day that I was standing in the kitchen talking to my dad. It was about 1994. I was a senior in high school. And he asked me, "What do you want to do the rest of your life? What are you going to school for? And I said, I was in love with computers. I want to be a computer programmer. And he said, that is a terrible idea. He said, no one goes to college to be a programmer. And we laugh at that now and how wrong someone could be at that point. But in 1994, who knew, right? And so, I meandered through school. By the time I declared my major for accounting, what I landed on, because that was a good solid career path, according to Dad. I realized it was not as exciting as computers. And so it took me, I was on the 10-year plan at San Diego State. Took me a good decade, but I finally got my degree in computer science and began to kind of work my way through a career as a software engineer. I eventually, I was principal engineer just a few years back, maybe 6-7 years ago, and I was working at a startup. And we had dogs in the office, and we had catered breakfast and lunch, and we had haircuts and massages and just about every perk you could think of. But what we didn't have a lot of was people that looked like me. There were not a lot of women. And so as I started getting more involved in the community and trying to help early career professionals, it became more and more important to me to try and find ways that I could make the room look more like the way that our nation looks, right? We're a very diverse population of folks here. And so I eventually landed a role at a coding boot camp, and that kind of started my journey into education. I come, by the way, family of educators. Both my parents are school teachers. My younger sister's a school teacher. My grandmother's a school teacher. So I always knew at a young age, didn't want to be a teacher because it doesn't pay well. And there wasn't a lot of, computers and technology and all that. And so full circle, now that's entirely all I do, right, as an educator. But that first opportunity to work at a code school gave me some meat on the bone in terms of these are tangible things I can do to try and make impact in other people's lives. But because it was a coding boot camp that was tuition based, it was still unaffordable for a lot of people and beyond the accessibility for people that were working part-time jobs or wanted to transition into tech. And so I can remember, talking to someone, young lady was so excited, full of joy at a meetup and said, I want to work at a company like this. How do I do that? And I was like, well, it's not a lot of options because we only hire senior engineers. And so after working at the code school for a couple of years, they closed. I wanted to continue the mission. And so I started at San Diego Code School. And then within a few years, again, realized that I wasn't reaching populations that I wanted to reach. And the solution just kind of came to me when someone said, there is this pattern where you can pay people. I was like, wait, that sounds like that might work. Because the biggest challenge that we were finding, at least in software engineering, was that a lot of the employers wanted a full year of experience before they would be ready to hire someone. So we sort of married the idea of a coding boot camp with providing a year of meaningful experience to creating coding careers, which the nonprofit now serves a population that is typically very diverse, facing one or more significant barriers to employment. So that could be justice involved, experiencing homelessness. They could be food insecure. They could be survivors of domestic violence, human trafficking, refugees, populations that not only have one or two barriers, but they also have that need to be able to sustain themselves while they're making this career transition. And so we have now a registered apprenticeship program with the U.S. Department of Labor. We have a registered apprenticeship program with California DAS. We have a pre-apprenticeship program. And we have a Department of Defense skill bridge program for transitioning service members. So those are our principal programs that we're trying to grow. And our focus has really been on high wage, high growth jobs. So I know a lot of times when we think about tech, we think of like the entry level being desktop support or that really early level. We've tried to really focus on getting people in where there's an opportunity for them to grow fairly quickly in the careers. So as Luther mentioned, starting salaries are averaging around 80, but we've had folks get offers well north of $100,000 for their first role and have no experience prior to them coming to us, right? So they enroll in our pre-apprenticeship program, which we deliver on demand, and it's 100% online and remote. And so they can go through the pre-apprenticeship program. From there, we can pull them into the apprenticeship. And then again, they're off to the races at that point. It's a full-time job. 40 hours a week, PTO, benefits, all that good stuff. So I'll pause there. That's the origin story. That's what we're all about. And we're really trying to grow into all the other high wage, high growth digital careers. So cloud engineering, cybersecurity engineering, anything that really, like I said, leads to some of these progressions in careers that can really get people, whole life-changing experience. So I'll pause there. Peter.
I'm just curious right out of the gate, if you could talk about how you fund all this fabulous work you're doing. Can you talk about that, please?
Sure. So I am not independently wealthy, nor did I come from a philanthropic background. And so this is a lot of the nonprofit space is brand new to me. And I've made most of the mistakes apparently you can make as a human in this workforce development nonprofit space. I naively came in thinking this was going to be like, outcome and performance based, like we're gonna crush it. We're gonna give people great jobs and serve populations that are historically underrepresented, and people just throw money at us. Apparently it doesn't work that way. So we bootstrapped by first going to employers and saying like, hey, I know you're a tech company and you might be hesitant to hire some early career technologists, but what if there's something in your backlog that we can take on as a project? And we started doing project-based work. We'd go to them and say, there's something that's not in the critical path of your engineering team. Can we break off something that will make an internal customer happy or make somebody else externally happy that you're, building some feature that's like way down your roadmap? This did a couple of things. It reduced the pressure for us to have to like deliver something, guns blazing with a bunch of senior engineers, but instead we could really allow the junior engineers to have some time to build things. And it got us to the point where we could sort of build relationships with employers, but it wasn't sustainable because it requires you have to have project managers, you have to have a salesperson, you've got to really deliver product, which means you're also going to have a lot of senior engineers helping out. And so that's kind of how we started. That was the on-ramp. And we got to the point where we could sort of start pivoting to a more sustainable model. And that was that we would front the capital up front and we would just train and do a recruit, hire, train, and then deliver. And the customers in that scenario wouldn't be looking at product, but instead they'd be hiring our apprentices on a contract to hire basis. And we would just mark up the contract. So we might invest like $30,000 into training someone for 3 to 6 months. And then at 6 months, we can place them with an employer. And then we charge the employer $50. So we're covering half of the payroll then, and we're covering the other half of the previous 6 months, right? And then when they convert the individual, if we were still short, then we would say here's a conversion fee as well. And that would get us to break even. We were leveraging some state funds. So we've been successful with a moderate amount of WIOA funding. We've been able to leverage ETP contract and innovation grant, but all told, that still only represents about a third of the revenue. The majority of the revenue comes from fee-based services that we charge directly to the enterprise clients. So they're really the ones that are benefiting, right, of having these like highly skilled folks. And so that's what we've had to really sell, which is this is an innovative way for companies to be able to invest where they traditionally are using, other methods, right? They're going to a 4-year university. They've got a college recruiting team. This is another completely new pipeline or new lane that we're able to build for them.
Thank you.
So I know, Luther, you wanted me to kind of cover the models, and I've talked about 2 already. There's a third model that we're striving to move towards, and that's, I think, the most sustainable model. And that is the way that apprenticeship traditionally is done, where the employer is the one that is the hiring entity, and they are the employer of record. And then the intermediary like us just comes in and does the recruiting and the training and running the program and the logistics of applying for state funds and trying to reduce the overall costs, all those kinds of things. That's what we're striving towards. We have a few clients that are on that model, but then we have some clients draw on the, the second model, which is that we're having to invest. And then we just very rarely will actually do a project, and a project-based engagement is like the smallest amount of the model. Where we think we can mostly grow the organization is in that more traditional, the employer is willing to hire and believe in the apprenticeship pattern, and then we can take care of mostly the servicing of it. Orion, does that answer your question? I saw your hand go up and then go back down. So
No, I'm curious about WIOA because if you talk to most people who work within a workforce board or region, like WIOA and apprenticeship, a registered apprenticeship are like oil and water. Like they just, no one's seemed to figure out how to crack that nut. And just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that.
yeah, it's interesting because depending on who you ask, there's folks either hate WIOA or they really hate WIOA. But there's not. So I think it stems, and again, it's just I'm not an insider in here, but I think it stems from just there's a lot of hoops and hurdles, and there's a lot of compliance around the spending of WIOA and the documentation that you got to kind of have in order to be able to stay in compliance with the federal government. I look at it, I'm like, this is formula funding. So like whatever the formula pays for, like, let's do the work to like get as much of it as we can, but I don't have to do all that legwork. Right. And so I can appreciate the fact that if it's challenging for them, they're not going to want to do it. So well, first of all, a lot of the WIOA funding is used on different programs at workforce development boards, right? So the more obvious ones that we almost always think of are going to be like OJT contracts and training contracts, right? Those are the two big buckets. There's also lots of other buckets that they can use that money and slide it over to like incumbent worker training to upskill people that have been on the job but need a title change or they need to move somewhere else. And so I think I'm still learning that there's like all these other ways that the funds could be allocated. But the challenge is that within each of the workforce development boards, and there's approximately 54 here in California, 55, 56, somewhere in that number, right? They are all run differently. Some are like quasi-governmental institutions, some are like a public nonprofit. So like there's not one playbook that they're all working off of. They kind of have a different take depending on what they see working, what's not working, what's aligning with their local economic development plans. And so there's a lot of inconsistency. So I feel like that's one of the biggest challenges with WIOA is that it's just not consistently implemented. I'll give you tangible examples. When we get an OJT contract from San Diego Workforce, which is our local workforce investment board, they will reimburse usually like 50% for the first 6 months. If you just go one county north, Riverside, they'll reimburse 50% for the first 3 months. So half as much in an OJT contract. And so when an employer is going to see that kind of variation, the employer is going to be like, whoa, like what's going on here, depending on where we hire someone from. But they're not yet at that point where everybody else has kind of shifted into the mentality of like, hey, someone might live in the next county and they might work at the, office and they don't have to drive in. So all of that is still very malaligned with where employers are. And so what we've tried to do is really focus on like being employer centric. And if we can make and get programs to work, awesome. But we try not to fight for WIOA dollars. We tend to just say, like, if we can't get it to work, if it doesn't line up. And the biggest challenge that we have from a practical standpoint is to get WIOA funding, usually you have to first have the candidate literally walk into a Career Center of America. And then there's very little communication. And so almost all of them will tell you, like, after they walk in and they're assigned a person, have them tell you who that person is so that you can then reach back over to that agency and have them like sort of like walk it through a process. So it's just like, it's really broken. And imagine as broken as you can imagine something to be, that's about how broken it is at most of the boards. And I think it's just because they're resistant to put a lot of effort into something that's really challenging to do. It's much easier to win a grant and be able to structure how you're going to use those private funds, right? Or use money that's coming from a foundation than it is to work through the mechanics of WIOA. Now, the silver lining to this is ARPA dollars. And so a lot of workforce development boards may have some American Rescue Plan dollars that they've asked for.
Oh.
You can structure programs that might be hard to do with WIOA, just logistically they're hard to do, but that barrier is gone with ARPA. It's much easier to spend those funds. And so in some cases, there will be boards that will tell you, like, we won't do any OJTs, but we'll do a ARPA funded OJT contract.
Hmm.
So that's the silver lining I'd say that we have right now. But yeah, WIO is tough. It's
So
tough.
thank you. I mean, we're exploring it for TechSF apprenticeship, and definitely want to reach out to you to kind of trade some notes and get your guidance on the back end. And then I know that they're in the process of reauthorizing WIOA, and so I feel like your kind of recommendations or experiences would be really important as they're looking to use that formula fund to scale apprenticeships. But yeah, thank you.
And it's the last thing I'll mention about that is interesting because when you talk to the feds who distribute the money to the states and then the states distribute it to their boards, the federal government actually has a program that's called Yes, WIOA Can. And so if you have to have a program called Yes, WIOA Can, something's broken somewhere in the right? And so yeah, so it's there, it's available. And so I always tell people, I encourage folks, talk to your local investment board because or workforce development board, your board in particular could be phenomenal. And they're just like, oh yeah, like I went to Bakersfield of all places, Bakersfield, and they're like, yeah, we do the most OJTs in like the country. And I'm like, how is that possible? And they're just like, because like we got a system down, we know we embrace it, we use this lever. And then you might have other places that are in a big population, big city, and they're just like, oh no, we don't do that. Like we don't, it's too much work. So Peter, I think I saw your hand go up again.
I just wanted to make a note. I love your quote. Some people hate WIO and other people really hate WIO. I like that quote. I'll use that. But I think I put in the chat one with WIOA money, a certain amount of money goes to the state workforce investment board. I don't know if you dealt with them, but they put out a whole lot of money, which I think could be up the alley for your group. For example, there's one called the Breaking Barriers Initiative. Have you run across that? I put the link in the chat. It's open right now, due I think in December, and they want the lead to be a community-based organization addressing barriers to employment for specific populations, which sounds a lot like who you're serving. But the state board is in some ways easier to deal with, and I don't know if anyone on this call would agree with that, but they have a lot of really interesting initiatives. It's worth looking at what they're doing, and that can get your local board off their seat if you show up with a couple $1 million, you know.
Well, everybody likes when you have money, but
Anyway, I put the link in the chat.
yeah, I'll definitely take a look at that.
Mike, what are your general plans for moving up to the Bay Area? I know we've had some conversations about Sacramento, but are you open to moving north?
Yeah, so the two things I think every community-based organization that does this kind of work needs are funding. Everybody always, we need money, right? And the second is jobs. We need firm commitments from employers that they're actually going to hire folks. Because as you can imagine, like in the model that we're in right now, primarily we're investing about $30,000 per participant before we start recovering money from an employer. So we got to put $30,000 out to hopefully get at least $30,000 back. That still that has to be, we've got an order from a customer and we've got a client that says, I'm ready to hire 3 people before we bring 3 people into the program. So what we're really looking for is to find multiple employers, probably, that each of them want to hire a few apprentices. Our model actually scales down pretty well. So it could even be a smaller company that wants to just hire maybe 1 apprentice and they want to test it out before they're ready to ramp it up. But that's the key. Once we have that, we always start with employer demand. We always start with, are the requests from employers for different career pathways ones where they're willing to actually hire? If we can create a program and a plan that actually gets the candidate to where they need them to make that offer. But that's the gatekeeper. As soon as we have that, as soon as we have a few companies that say we're ready to go, we've been in a remote posture. So we can literally start recruiting people, or you might already have people that are interested or in the pre-apprenticeship program and just waiting for an opportunity.
Right, Carl?
Yeah, sorry I came in late on this. Really what I'm hearing is that having a lot of luck working with the Workforce Investment Board. But have you're talking about trying to make connections with single employers? Have you worked with traditional building trades apprenticeship programs? Because when you work with them, each apprenticeship program has a connection with over 100 employers.
Yeah, it's interesting. I hadn't really thought of more traditional construction trade organizations, but it would be interesting to see how many of them are going through digital transformation and need to find people on that side of the business.
Well,
I know
I can tell you right away that a lot of the apprenticeship programs are I was a apprenticeship training director for the plumbers and steam fitters in San Jose, California for 20 years. And I can tell you that especially over the last 5 to 10 years, there's been a big push in technology. We're doing a lot of, in addition to just apprenticeship training, we're doing a lot of journeyman training for, all different types of CAD, drafting, BIM, Revit. We're doing classes on every kind of, software that you can think of, Bluebeam, PlanGrid. We're teaching how to do to our apprentices and our journeymen how to use robotic layout systems. And so there's an incredible amount of technology that's being injected into the building trades almost weekly. And it's in fact, it's tough for us to keep up, but our contractors help out. It's a great partnership. And we actually had a really terrific, all the building trades in the San Jose area and actually all the way up the peninsula into San Mateo have a great connection. 2 programs, the trades orientation program TOP, and then there's another program TIP where it's a pre-apprenticeship program, and they're qualifying people. They're getting them ready and prepared to take our examinations, and they're getting their expectations lined up so that they know what they're getting into before, so that the apprenticeship programs aren't wasting time by bringing somebody in and then losing a space because they leave the program, after 3 or 4 months. So it's a really great partnership. I was kind of taken aback because I think I came in right in the middle of the wheel. Was terrible.
Yeah, no, and I'm sure that it's one of many different ways, because I feel like apprenticeship is super underutilized as a pattern. And so we started in tech because my background is a software engineer. So I kind of knew the space. It was connected with enough employers. And I naturally think of the next high growth sector, which is healthcare. But you're right, there may be some inroads in the more traditional trades as they go more digital. So
actually, healthcare would be a good one for you to approach, because there's a lot of unionism in healthcare, and that's where you get the cadre, of employers. One of the things that when they started doing all these other apprenticeship programs, the non-traditional apprenticeship programs, the thing that was always missing was that in a building trades program that's a union program, that the benefit is that the apprentice doesn't have to work for a single employer all the way through their apprenticeship. If an apprentice gets laid off, because in construction is just like tech, actually. They ramp up when they have a big job, and then when that job starts to pare down, they lay off. But then there's another job that's starting up somewhere else. They go to work for the other employer. And the important thing about having the union is that you have a clearinghouse for these for the journeymen and the apprentices. When they get laid off, they just go into the out of work list and then they get dispatched out. But during that whole process, they don't lose their pension or health and welfare benefits because they're all through the union. And so it's kind of what makes that portion of it, the building trades portion of it, work. And it would probably work with healthcare as well.
Yeah, no, it's, I think, a phenomenal direction.
Hey, Carl, would you mind putting your email in the chat for Mike? Mike, you couldn't find a better sort of ambassador into the world of the construction trade and the merit of high tech than Carl. So this is a good.
Yeah, I'd love to connect.
Thanks, Phil.
What else? Any other questions?
Yeah, I wanted to know how you're, one of the challenges is always, at least in our world, is employers and kind of making the pitch to them. I found a lot of times, particularly if they think that you're coming from a DEI space, you can kind of shunt it off to corporate social responsibility. How are you able to get into the core of the employer business, which is what really matters to them, which is finding talent? I mean, what's the messaging around that?
Yeah, so first is we started in a niche. So we started in a niche for I guess a software ecosystem, and it's around ServiceNow. How many of you are anybody familiar with ServiceNow? Nobody. Okay. Well, Rick knows, but if you are in a big company, company that has lots of employees and equipment like laptops and other whatnot, ServiceNow started as an IT service desk platform. So all of the people that are taking those tickets and helping you either get your laptop or get it fixed, all those kinds of things, they not only kind of penetrated the enterprise market. So more than 80% of the Fortune 500 companies use this piece of software, but it also is like comparable now to like other ERP systems. So names that you might have heard of, like SAP or Oracle. They got lots of integrations with other big enterprise providers and platforms like Microsoft. And so as a big Fortune 500 an ecosystem that has a lot of other managed service providers as well as customers, we just saw there were lots of opportunities for developers in that ecosystem, but it takes a little while to get trained up and to understand the nuances of not just software development, but software development in the context of this particular platform. Similar to maybe familiar with Salesforce, or other pieces of large platform software that require engineers to have very specific knowledge, or Microsoft, right? You could be a managed service provider for Microsoft, and you're helping small businesses get into the Microsoft ecosystem or onto their cloud. And so we started in that niche because we saw that there was a demand. So we always start with where's the biggest demand, and we saw that, hey, folks were having a hard time finding ServiceNow application developers. Folks were willing to bring on early career people and train them if they could see they had potential. And in software, it's always also good to not be a generalist. It's probably the same way in a lot of other industries, but to be more of a specialist as fast as you can, so that you're not competing with everybody all over the world, but instead, you have something that's desirable for a small segment that you can sort of dominate. So that helped us to sort of solidify, okay, we've got some employer demand. Now, as we all experienced, it was about a year or so ago where the economy started to kind of slow down and folks started to pause on the hiring. That has sort of slowed that growth. But as an organization, ServiceNow is still continuing to grow, and they need more and more developers. In fact, they have this initiative right now, it's called Rise Up, where they want to train something like 1 million ServiceNow developers in like the next year or two. And they're about 50% of the way there. So they've trained several 100,000 developers to work in their ecosystem. So we just kind of like caught the momentum that we saw growing in that ecosystem, and use that to penetrate one, with the idea that we can now probably go into Oracle, Microsoft, Google, each of those ecosystems, and find where there are gaps and there's not enough talent given the demand, and sort of like and grow that way. So that's the strategy that we've used to try and find customers and find demand from employers. Did that help? Did that answer the actual question? I don't remember what the question was.
That does quite well. And who's part of your ecosystem that's keeping your fingers on the pulse of just what's happening in the industry? Because that's a challenge on its own.
Well, the good news is we are a vendor of ServiceNow, and so we work very closely with them. So we've been able to build a trusted relationship with them. We actually provide them TAs and instructors for some of their training cohorts that they do. We work with a lot of their elite partners. There's different rankings, premier, elite. So we work with some of their big partners. big tech companies. I'm sure everybody's heard of CDW. So we're a vendor with CDW. Lots of the other ones we're having conversations. We might not be there yet, but all the big four like UI, Accenture, Deloitte, all of them are on our radar as companies that we provide something that I think helps them meet the demand of them. Just they need more consultants, they need more engineers. So fortunately, when we work directly with ServiceNow, they kind of let us know, hey, here's what's coming down the roadmap, or here are ways that we can work with you and help support so that you can grow alongside of us. And that's rare. Like I feel like we're very fortunate to be in a position where they will literally say, like, hey, we want to support your organization. It's an important part of how we fulfill our DE&I strategy and want to help grow alongside of us. Which, I mean, we've tried it with other people. We have a fantastic relationship with Microsoft in terms of like they've funded us, Google has funded us, but there's nowhere near the type of like communication between our team and Microsoft as there is with like our team in ServiceNow. And that has been really helpful to allow us to grow further into that ecosystem with that type of support. So again, everything's driven by the employer. And if you can get in and build a really solid relationship with the employer, and if your mission aligns with them, it's an awesome scenario.
Other questions?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So I want to ask what his spiel is when he approaches the companies and say, okay, we have this and we can offer you this. And how does he sell? How does he sell his services so that he can get some openings for his apprentices?
Yeah. So the ServiceNow one is the easiest if we're talking to a partner. So a partner is like an Accenture, right? So Accenture might work with lots of other organizations like maybe American Airlines, and they work on a project. ServiceNow doesn't do a lot of the actual implementation and management, but instead they license the software. And then you hire someone like Deloitte to just do the implementation and to maintain it and to service it, right? So those are easy to find because you can just go to their site. You can see all of them listed, right? And you can just pick them off one at a time and just call them up and say, hey, do you have an apprenticeship program? Do you have an internship program? Are you finding enough candidates? And almost all of them will say no. And then you might ask them, well, are you finding, enough women and diverse candidates? Is that something that's important to you? And they usually will say yes. So the questions are usually pretty straightforward. They're usually pretty eager, right? They're usually looking for, and that's we at this point we really feel like there is strong demand and there's a need for unfilled roles, and so that's what kind of makes those conversations easier. Now, on the other hand, a lot of the folks that are customers, they have like 7,000 customers of their platform. They're going to just be like random company. So the one that was most interesting to me, I went to a conference last year. It's called Afrotech. It's the biggest Black tech conference in the US. And it was just interesting to see all the different companies there because they had brands that I would expect have big either cybersecurity or software engineering teams, like the American Expresses and Tesla. But John Deere was there. And I was like, wow, like such an iconic American brand, but I wouldn't have thought that they would be at like a Black tech conference. And they're recruiting and they DE&I is important to them. And so I think it's harder for us to find those folks, but those conversations are also along the same lines. Are you using the ServiceNow platform? If they say yes, I'm like, awesome, great. They probably are having a hard time finding developers to help them with the ServiceNow platform. Or they might say, no, we don't use the ServiceNow platform. And then I might probe a little bit and ask them, well, how are you attracting talent? Are you guys doing really well and it's easy for you to attract talent, or are you finding it more challenging and more difficult? And I usually will just start kind of like peeling back the layers of like, what are their real needs? Because not everybody's going to be ready for apprenticeship. Not everybody's going to have the buy-in from their leadership team to make these kinds of investments and to be thinking not just of the costs now, but like lowering their costs over the next 3 to 5 years, because you're not going to necessarily see an immediate return on your investment, right? You're going to have to invest time and energy and train people up, and then it's going to start paying off in the years 2 and 3 and 4. And so that's a lot of what I'm looking for as well. I'm trying to figure out are the people that I'm talking to thinking strategically about how they're going to grow their engineering teams, or are they in this mode where they're just like, we just need to hire senior engineers because we got to get a certain amount of stuff done by the end of this quarter, and we're not even talking about next year's hiring. Like, we don't know what our budget's going to be for next year. Right? When you having those conversations with employers, you kind of know this is like an idea stage for them, and you can plant the seed of like, hey, once you get everything kind of situated, this is going to be a way for you to bend your human capital costs down over the next few years. But they're not really ready to have that conversation, so there's not much there for you. So that's the first thing that I usually try and figure out is like, is the company in a good position to actually embrace this? And do they, at their core, do they really understand that this is a way to help people that historically are not inside your organization get into a role, because you're removing the barriers that keep them from getting into your organization? You have some organizations that are using apprenticeships not in the best way, right? They're expecting people to have college degrees to get into their apprenticeship program, or some of these other patterns that I feel like aren't their best use. But I'd love to see just more people doing it, right? To see more people figuring out this is a great way to do skills-based hiring. And then it's just potential. Like, does this person have potential? Can I get them to where I need them to be in the time frame that my team will give me? Right? Can I get them there in 6 months? Can I get them there in 12 months? And I think employers will eventually get it. We're still early. It's still early.
Are you pitching them the fact that these apprenticeship programs are more directed learning, and that there are things like micro credentials and badges and things that they could use that are if not as good as a college degree, maybe even better, because it's so directed into what they want them to know?
Yeah, and that's a big selling point. So the fact that we can really drill in, not necessarily the certificate aspect, or like a lot of the employers, they really just want to know, like, does the person have these technical skills? And more importantly, do they have these soft skills, right? Are they curious? Are they good communicators? Do they work well with a team member? Do they have that pattern that you've seen over 3 to 6 months? Because they'll poach them from smaller startups, right? So if a student goes to a coding boot camp and doesn't have a degree, they probably will leave that coding boot camp. They'll probably go work for a small, scrappy startup that can't afford senior engineers. They'll spend a good 6 months there. And then once they have 6 months of experience and they start, their LinkedIn profile shows that they have some experience, the big companies swoop in and they'll poach them, and they'll be able to give them a much bigger, promotion than the company that hired them. That can't, you just can't give somebody a 30% raise, right? So that is what we're trying to eliminate. We're trying to say, look, we can give you a pathway so you don't have to poach these people from the small, scrappy startups. You can invest directly in them, and we'll make sure they have all the skills that you're looking for. If you're a C# shop, we'll train them on C#. If you're Python data, we'll train them on those pieces. So I'm 100% with you, Carl. I think that has been, one of the biggest selling points, is that they come out of the program with really relevant skills that allow them to be at, billable hours or productive, whatever you want to call it, earlier than if they're just going with like a generic, CS program, or maybe even just a generic boot camp.
Thanks, Carl. Rick.
Yeah, so Mike, one of the virtues that Luther alluded to at the beginning was your placement rate, and so you might want to make a point about how that happens. And then also, I don't think you've really gotten into the skill bridge angle, and I think that could use a little bit of attention as well.
Yeah. So part of it is somewhat doctored in that once we bring someone in, they're employed with us, and then we can hold them, right? And so part of our placement might mean that someone's going to get 18 months and somebody else is going to get a job in 8, and they're off our books and they're good to go, right? And so we're able to, if we can, hold someone longer In some cases, we can go back to the workforce board and say, hey, can you give us another OJT? And if we continue to give this person promotions and raises, can we keep them for a little bit longer so we can place them? I've always, all the programs that I've run, I've always tried to make sure that we're really doing right by the individual, which might mean giving them extra months if they need 14 months or 18 months to make that happen. And obviously it's gotten much harder to place people with the economy slowing down, and it's just harder to place people. But that's one of the advantages we have, right? It's not like a college where they don't really have a great way to track how they're placing people, who they're placing them with, and keep them for any extended period of time. On the Skill Bridge, so for those of you that are not familiar with the Skill Bridge program, it's through the Department of Defense. If you are an employer, we happen to be an employer because we're the employer of record for a lot of our apprentices. And so if you are an employer, and especially if you're one like us that has a registered apprenticeship program, then the DoD can basically give you permission to be on this list. And then the service members, so military service members, when they're transitioning out of the military, they want them to land in great careers. So they will allow them to participate in a program where their commanding officer will give them up to the last 6 months of their service to go basically intern at a company. They still get their military pay and benefits. So whatever their current pay and benefits are, they retain them, but they get to come and train with us as a Skill Bridge provider. And so one of the neat things about our program is not only does it give us the ability to start them on our curriculum, get them through our pre-apprenticeship, get them as far as we can into the apprenticeship in 6 months in terms of the curriculum portion, but once they come into our apprenticeship, we also are Veterans Affairs approved, which means that they can also get a housing allowance once they actually complete and they come into our apprenticeship program. They won't all come into our apprenticeship program. Some of them will get jobs by the end of their Skill Bridge. So we had Microsoft, we had somebody got like a 6-figure offer from Microsoft just the other day from our Skill Bridge program. So they're training with us. They're still out there searching to kind of figure out what's going to happen on their last day with the military. And this individual is going to Microsoft, 6-figure offer, which is like phenomenal, right? That's not going to be everybody, because some of the folks in the service, they got bachelor's degrees, they're working on their master's degree, right? And so they're going to come in at different levels with different experience and backgrounds. But like I said, the neat part about our Skill Bridge program is it marries really well with apprenticeship. So Skill Bridge is everything up until their last day of service. And then the last day of service, they're unemployed at that point. So they got to find a job. So we can hire them into the apprenticeship program. They can get what's called a BAH housing allowance. Have any of you been in the military, in the service? Those in the service? Okay. So BAH, they use all these acronyms. In short, BAH means a housing allowance every month. It's about $3,500. So they're going to give you $3,500 if you do one of two things. You're in the service. As part of being in the service, you get a housing allowance. Or when you get out of the service, if you have a day and $1 left on your GI Bill benefit. So this doesn't come out of their tuition portion. This isn't money that gets taken from the school part of it. They can still go and get a bachelor's degree. So a lot of people, especially people that have only been in for maybe 4 to 6 years, once they get out of the service, the first thing they do is they go enroll in college. Not because they want to get a degree, but because if they enroll in college, they can get their housing allowance, right? They can get the BAH $3,500 a month, right? But they have to be enrolled in a degree program. Or in our case, our apprenticeship program is same sort of like credit with the VA, so we can enroll them. They don't use any of their GI Bill, so they can still use that GI Bill to get their college degree at some point if they're interested in it, but they can exercise getting that housing allowance, getting that $3,500. So they get the pay that we're giving them, they get the benefits and all that. This is after a Skill Bridge, once they're in our apprenticeship program, and they'll also get $3,500 from the VA, the government. It's pretty nice.
Yeah. Kirsten, great to see you. And you've got the last question. Go ahead.
Thanks, Luther. Hi, Mike. I'm Kirsten. I work at the Cape Horse Center up in Oakland. I've been a big fan of your work from afar for a long time. Thank you for absorbing a lot of apprentice talent after the fallout of many booms and busts of other programs we've seen over the last year. That was a great example of embedding yourself into, sort of bureaucratic processes based on understanding of incentives and behaviors. My question was if you've had to adjust it all around, obviously the hype around AI is huge, but just how has that changed how you've been teaching it all with your apprenticeship program? I'm just trying to better understand that in general. So
It's interesting because we're still in the very early phases of it. We are going to have at some point apprenticeship, probably with the U.S. Department of Labor first. That's specifically in that job category. So it'll probably be like AI engineer. But it has really helped and enhanced first how we can create curriculum and like practice exercises and code exercises that were just not possible to do before. So we've leveraged AI in order to just have much better curriculum that can have a much more personalized experience and journey for participants that we just didn't have the budget. If any of you guys have done instructional design before, you know, it's like hundreds of hours of work for every like finished hour of content. And so AI can really shrink that and make it much easier for you to fill in some of those gaps. So I love the fact that like we can now create much better curriculum. But we also have participants leveraging and using ChatGPT because it's sort of the equivalent of what Google was 2 or 3 years ago, or Stack Overflow was, you know, a year ago. Now Stack Overflow is like, it's done. It's like, it's gone. It's bye-bye. And that was the site that as an engineer, you would go to when you got stuck and you couldn't figure something out, you'd Google Stack Overflow, you get an answer there, you'd try it, and then you'd upvote it and say, yep, that's it. And so it was that like, you know, global democratized knowledge that's now being handed off to AI and AI tools. We can't even keep up. The leadership team, the engineering team, like we can't even keep up with every day. There's a new tool and a new library, and a new framework. It's moving so quickly, but the fundamentals are still really important. And that's a lot of what our focus is over the short period that we have folks for, because it's a big hill to climb to start with no coding experience and get to the point where you like understand your first language. And so I do think though, it's like having the ability to have ChatGPT like explain some code to you means that now everybody has the ability to have their own personal tutor, have their own senior engineer by them while they're learning to code if they can leverage those tools. So we really do encourage them to, you know, to use ChatGPT, use it to explain your code, use it to, you know, come up with new ideas, because that's what everybody else is doing. And the employers are going to have an expectation that you know how to use these tools. They're going to expect you to hit the ground running and be more productive than an early career person ever would have been before.
yeah, it sounds like knowing
sure.
like when to use it and when to not overuse it is what kind of I keep hearing.
Well,
yeah.
you can use it, but it's still, you still need to know how to code, right?
Exactly.
So if things go faster and will potentially give you more suggestions and recommendations, but you're still going to need to know where to put that piece of code in what file, right?
Yeah.
And
Okay.
alter it slightly for it to actually fit into the work that you're doing. So, but it just allows a person that is a year in to be as productive as maybe somebody that's 2 or 3 years in, right? It's going to really make it possible for people to be far more productive in a variety of different pathways, not just in software engineering, but I feel like everybody, if they're leveraging AI, it should make them more productive. And so it's a tool that you have to use because employers are going to expect that you're as productive as your competitors, right? So my take is it's not going to put anybody out of work. It is not going to take over software engineering to the point where we don't need engineers. We still need lots of folks that understand this.
Great. Thank you. That was super helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mike, this is fantastic. Really appreciate it. And in your spare time, I'm saying this somewhat facetiously, but it'd be great if you could put out a playbook on how to get this done, because you've got lots of strategies, lots of connections, and really appreciate everything you're bringing to the table. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Now I'll turn it over to Anita to wrap us up and talk about next time.
Yeah, thanks, Mike, and thanks everyone for joining us. This is super interesting. It is being recorded and will pop up on our YouTube channel sometime soon. I'm going to put a series of links in the chat for you. So this is our YouTube channel. Our next meeting is going to be on an unusual date. We're skipping our November and December regularly scheduled meetings because they fall so close to the holidays, and are going to combine those two into a meeting on December 5th. So you will be hearing from us on that. We are still discussing internally what the topic will be. You can always join our meetup group, which I also just put in the chat, to learn more. And then finally, I probably have many of your emails, if not all already, but if not, I have a new email form that I just created. It's here. And it also sort of doubles as a very, very short survey. So you can share your thoughts with us on tonight's event and so suggest topics for future events, which we really appreciate because we're a small group of folks who have been working in apprenticeship for a while, but we kind of tend to focus on our specialty areas, and we can always use your input on topics you'd like to hear about. So please fill out that form, even if you think I already have your email, it'd be greatly appreciated. But yeah, our next meeting is December 5th.
Thank you, Anita, and thanks everyone. Wonderful session. Really appreciate your input. Hope to see you again soon. Take care.
Night.
Thanks, you all.